Hey guys, my name is Daniel. I'm here once again with you from the Challenger Learning Center. Today, we have a very interesting experiment for you guys to do at your house, and that is to make a sundial. Well, we have a bright sunny day outside, and we're going to be going outside in just a minute, but before we do, I did want to walk you through what a sundial is and also what the history is of them, because it is interesting. I did not know much about these until I researched them myself. So let me share what I found with you online. So sundials are the oldest known instruments for telling time. That's pretty cool, right? So the surface of a sundial has markings, or like little tick marks, that show every hour of daylight. I want to emphasize daylight. So sundials don't work at night, of course, because you need the sun to be out for a sundial to work, hence the name sundial. So as the sun moves across the sky, another part of the sundial actually casts a shadow on these markings, and that object that casts the shadow is called a gnomon. Gnomon. That's the part of the sundial that casts the shadow on our tip marks. And the position of the shadow tells us what time it is. Okay? So let me show you this animation. Come on over here to my laptop over here. I found this animation thanks to Britannica Kids. And this will show the path that the sun will take and the corresponding reading on our sundial. Let me go ahead and reset our animation here. And before we begin the animation itself, I did want to point out the parts of our sundial here. So of course this is the main dial. You can see this is the main dial here. The gnomon that I mentioned, that's the part of the sundial that casts the shadow itself. That's right here. And we'll talk about how to make that with our homemade sundial. And then, of course, this is the shadow that is caused from the position of the sun versus where the gnomon, or where the gnomon is, versus where the sun is in the sky at that time. Now, before we begin, also, I do want to emphasize here that north is actually pointing down. So it's kind of upside down, but this was actually the best animation that I could find for visual purposes. Let me go and hit start and watch what happens. So the sun, of course, rises in the east, okay? You can see the shadow moving as the sun is moving across the sky, and then, of course, the sun sets in the west. And you can see that wherever the sun rises or sets, or wherever it is in the sky, that the shadow is opposite that direction because of the gnomon blocking the sun and causing the shadow to appear in the opposite direction. Let me run that one more time in case you missed something. Let me reset this and let's hit play. Here we go. So once more, the sun rises in the east and the shadow is pointing west. And then as the sun rises up, the shadow points more toward the north. That is where we are in the northern hemisphere. And then as the sun sets, of course, in the west, the shadow is pointing eastward. Ancient Egyptians actually made the earliest known sundial around 3500 BC. That's a long time ago, right? This sundial was simply a stick or a pillar that cast a shadow on the ground. The ancient Greeks, then they themselves made a sundial with a bowl-shaped opening that was cut into either block or into a block of stone or wood, and a pointer in the middle cast a shadow inside that bowl. Muslims actually later invented the modern sundial that we know about, and then clocks began to replace sundials in the 1300s. So that's a rough historical background of what sundials, or how and when they were made. Now, how they work, so like we mentioned with our animation online, the sun's light will actually make our gnomon, that part in the middle that casts the shadow, that causes a shadow to be formed on all of our tip marks, and that actual shadow will change its angle depending on how the sun's light is hitting that gnomon in the middle of our sundial. And why is that? Well, the Earth is constantly rotating. It is spinning on its axis, and it's also revolving or moving around the sun at the same time. So it's spinning on its axis and also moving around the sun, just like this. And that's what causes a sundial to work. Let's head outside, and it's time to build our sundial. I can't wait, guys. Well, here we are outside, guys, ready to make our sundial. It's a bright sunny day. I got my sunglasses on. I am ready to go. Are you guys ready? I hope you guys are. So here we go. So quick note before we begin about the materials that are needed to make our sundial. Make sure that you find a sunny spot in your yard at your house to place your sundial. If you can see around here, we have huge trees. Go take a look around. We have some huge trees that border our yard here. So I kind of found a spot right here that's right in the middle of those trees. That way I can get about the same amount of sunlight, when the sun actually rises and when it sets. That way I can get a pretty good spread of sunlight here throughout the day. Now, to build your sundial, look at my sample that I have here. All I used was a sand bucket. I filled it with sand to make the actual dial. You can even use a pot. This is the first trial that I tried. I used a pot with some potting soil and some dirt in here. The only thing I found with this was that the potting soil tended to loosen up. So my gnomon right here, we'll get to that in just a bit. My gnomon got kind of loose, and when it loosens up, the results are not as accurate because then the shadow can change. So I would recommend using something in your actual dial that holds your gnomon, which is of course the part that creates your shadow, that holds that gnomon in place. It's sturdy, it's firm, and that way you're accurate. That way all of your readings can be as accurate as possible, because that's really key here. So that's the main dial part. Again, use whatever you have at home. One website I even found said stick your gnomon right in the ground. Okay, just work with an adult though. Get a parent's permission before you do that. But that's another idea to build your main dial itself. Now for the gnomon, remember that's the part that makes the shadow on your sundial. The gnomon, again, you can use whatever you have at home. I ended up using, look at this, I used a pixie stick. Out of all things, right? I used a pixie stick because it's a long straw, and I found online that it is recommended using something that's not only long but also as straight as possible. I found one website that said use something that is about 2 feet long, and you can either use a stick, you can use a straw, maybe a pencil. Just be thinking of some things that you have at the house that you can use to use for your gnomon, for your sundial. The first trial, I'll show you this. I ended up using a stick right here. This isn't quite as straight as I would have hoped, and I was worried that this would affect my results. And also this stick is kind of thick too, so this actually made a wider shadow, and that was hard to accurately place my tick marks around the outside of the sundial. So I would recommend personally that you use something that's skinnier, like a straw, a pencil, or even like a skinny stick if you can find one at your yard. So that way you can have, again, as accurate readings as possible. Now, the gnomon, make sure that it is in the middle of your dial itself, of your sundial. And also, you might want to actually check, make sure it is completely vertical. Look at it on the side, crouch down by it, check all the sides around it, and make sure it is as vertical as possible. That was pretty much the consensus that I found online, that you want your gnomon to be vertical. Now moving on to what to use for the tick marks on the outside to label your hours. You can use rocks, you can use seashells, you can use pebbles, whatever you have at the house to label these. We have a gravel driveway, so I used some of the gravel from that, and I used a permanent marker to label my numbers on the rocks. You can use chalk, you can use stickers, whatever you want to label whatever you have at the house to make your tip marks. One thing I would not recommend you guys do is use washable markers or something that might wash away in case it happens to rain outside and your sundial is left outside. So use something that you know will stay on there even if it rains. Now, to label your sundial, we need to make a kind of a ring or a circle around the edge of our sundial on every hour. So we're currently when we're filming now, we're just after 11 o'clock, and I just put my 11 stone down. And you can see when we label each hour, we want to put the stone or whatever you are using for your tip marks on the hour. You want that to be right in the middle of this shadow. Okay, now it's just past 11 o'clock, so the shadow's just past the middle of our 11 stone, and that's to be expected. But make sure that you are as accurate as possible. Once more, place the tick mark in the middle of the shadow on the hour, every hour of daylight throughout the day. And I will come back with you periodically and show you the progress that I have made with this. One more look here. I did want to show you this. I started at 8 o'clock this morning, and you can see the shadow from our sundial did not really budge much. So I actually had to kind of stagger my rocks in a sense here. So I'm having my even hours on the outside and my odd hours kind of catty-cornered on the inside. And I'll come back with you throughout the day and we will see what we got. Okay, it is now 12 o'clock and it's time to place our 12 stone down on our sundial. So you can see where the shadow is right here. And like I said before, my even hours are on the outside of the dial just due to space, and my odd hours are on the inside. So I'm going to place my 12 rock right in the middle of the shadow. Again, be as accurate as possible. That's very key. So there's 12 o'clock. I will come back to you with more progress as we go throughout the day. The time is now 2 o'clock. I just put down my 2 stone here. Now, you can see that the shadow right here does not extend all the way to the edge of the bucket because of the angle of our sun right now is pretty much overhead or pretty close to it. So that way, that makes the shadow much shorter. Now, what I would do is if this happens, take a pencil or something that is long at your house and kind of use that to extend the shadow. You might need to get on top of the bucket or container that you are using for your dial to get an accurate view of that, but use the pencil or whatever you have at home to extend your shadow, and then make sure to put the stone or whatever you're using to label your hours right in the middle of that shadow. So that's what I would recommend for you guys to do, and I will see you guys in a couple hours. Well, it looks like extra clouds are rolling in and it might be starting to rain soon, so before it does that, I did want to show you guys my final sundial for the day. Take a look at this. This is pretty cool. So I have all my labeled rocks here that I labeled every single hour, and like we previously discussed, I put them or I lined them up right in the middle of the shadow on every single hour throughout the day. I want to give you guys a few final tips as we close. First of all, I do want to encourage you guys to be, of course, as precise as possible when making your own sundial at home. It might take a little bit of patience, so make sure that you are patient, and it might take some perseverance too. If you have to redo it, like now, if extra clouds roll in, you might have to continue the sundial maybe the next day or the next bright and sunny day that you have. And that honestly is a way of maybe verifying your sundial over time, making sure that indeed you placed your tip marks in the right spot. Some things for you guys to check with your sundial and maybe to experiment with. Look at the shadow that is cast by your gnomon in your sundial. Look at it and see how long it might be over time throughout the day. Measure it in the winter, look at it in the spring, look at it during your summer months, and also during the fall. See how the season changes your angle of the sun and also the length of your shadows. Are the measurements different? Which seasons might be having the longer shadow involved in your sundial? Secondly, make a second sundial after we reset our clocks due to a time change. Does that affect how your sundial looks, how it's made up and everything with where your numbers are? Take a look at that. Also, try another sundial in another maybe part of your state, of the United States, maybe another part of the world. Think about how that might change how your sundial might look. Maybe you are in a different time zone, in another hemisphere. Some things to think about, right? This, of course, is a clock, right? I did want to emphasize that in general, the numbers, how you arrange them on your sundial, will likely not match up with the placement of your numbers that you would expect on a clock like this. The main reason being is just with the path that the sun takes across the sky. It rises in the east, sets in the west. And that would cause the beginning of the day, all the shadows to be facing west, as we showed with our animation. And then when it sets, when the sun sets, these shadows will likely be, toward the east. Okay, that's what you will typically find. In addition, sundials are only used during the day. They're only used when there is daylight, and a clock like this is used during the day and night. Your sundial, well, it could vary from what I found. I would love to hear from you guys. What did you find? What did you experiment with? And I would love to compare from what I found to what maybe you found. Please stay in touch. I would love to hear from you, and I hope you guys learned a lot about sundials, how to make one, and what all is involved in them. I thank you guys for joining me, and I will catch you guys later.